Hey folks, well, time for an update in the exciting world of American politics, and certainly in the last couple of months, things have been pretty wild. On the Republican side, Trump was convicted on 34 counts in the hush money trial. 2 weeks ago, survived an assassination attempt in which the assassin allegedly had 8 clear shots at him, a clear failure of the Secret Service to maintain his safety. And on the Democrat side, following Joe Biden's miserable performance in the June 27th debate with Trump, caused a storm of anxiety among Democrats, calling for his resignation. And he finally capitulated last weekend and resigned from the race and endorsed Kamala Harris as the presidential nominee. So, well, that remains to be confirmed, but basically now we are very interested in the prospects for Kamala Harris going forward. So, she has a pretty accurate horoscope. She was born on October 20th, 1964. Astrodatabank gives it a Rodden rating of AA, which means birth certificate in hand, 9:28 p.m. in Oakland, California. And, that's significant because it gives us confidence not only in the natal horoscope, the so-called Rashi, Kundali, but also gives us confidence in the amshas, the harmonic charts that we often like to look at to analyze the various aspects of a person's life. Okay, so without further ado, let's have a look at that horoscope. Okay, so here's the horoscope in question. So just a quick circle around the chart. Rahu in the first, Mars debilitated in the second, Venus ordinary in the third, Sun debilitated in the fifth, Mercury ordinary in the mildly combust in the fifth, Ketu in the seventh, Saturn very powerful, Swarashi and retrograde in the ninth, Moon, bright full moon in the 11th, Jupiter retrograde, therefore bright in the 12th. Okay, that's a quick superficial summary of status of the grahas. Let's get into the weeds. The first thing we should do with any horoscope is take note of what yogas exist in the chart, because basically that gives us a handle on what are the credits and debits vis-a-vis karma for that individual. So let's proceed with the simplest to the more complicated yogas. First things first. Sun and Mercury together is the basis of Budhaditya yoga, but does it fulfill the other requisites, which is that either the first and or the fifth should be activated? Well, as it happens, Mercury owns the first, ding, and Sun and Mercury occupy the fifth, ding, ding. Okay, so this is a valid Budhaditya yoga. What does it mean? Rational thought, intelligence, all good stuff. What comes next? Dhana yogas. Oh, well, first I should remark in this horoscope, for a candidate vying for the most powerful political position in the most powerful country in the world, it's a bit disconcerting to note that there are no Mahapurusha yogas here. There are no Raja yogas, no Dharma Karma Adhipati yogas, all the things that we expect, reading Shastra to, assess an individual's capacity for, positions of high responsibility. Be that as it may, there are other things. So the Budhaditya yoga is there. What else? There is a Dhana yoga. How is that formed? A trinal lord and a money lord. So in this case, we have Mercury, a trinal lord, in mutual aspect with the moon, which is one of the money lords, lord of the second in this case. Now, Mercury is ordinary, mildly combust, but moon is very strong because it is a full moon. Okay, so strong Dhana yoga. In the first 24 hours of her candidacy, she raised, well, I've lost track because the figure keeps moving, $60 million, $70 million in the first 24 hours, and now she's up to 120 plus million in funding flowing in. So who knew? But there's the Dhana yoga in operation, I guess. After that, what do we see? Well, it's common to find a Parivartana yoga in the in a horoscope because it occurs in 40% of all charts. Here we have one, Venus in the sign of Leo ruled by the Sun, Sun in the sign of Libra ruled by Venus. So there we have a sign exchange, or what's also called a mutual reception between Sun and Venus, lords of third and fifth. So that's one Parivartana. However, there is another here too. Moon and Mars. Mars debilitated in Cancer, the sign of the moon, while the moon is in Aries, the sign of Mars. So there's another Parivartana yoga there between lords of 2 and 11. Okay, so back to the exchange between lords of 3 and 5. Basically, that strengthens both of these houses. The third house, courage, determination, adventure, daring do, skills acquisition, all strong. Fifth house, rational, intelligent, analytic mind. Those are, evident strengths. With the Moon and Mars exchange, 2nd and 11th, this is good for, certainly for raising money. Some consider this a form of Dhana yoga, an exchange between lords of 2 and 11. It can give, a great strength in terms of, social engagement of some kind or another, and involvement in large enterprise and political aspirations and activity. Those are all 11th house issues. Second house, there's the oratorical sort of issue. The capacity to speak to large groups and be successful in that. The debilitated Mars is a little bit of a thorn in the side there, although the Parivartana partially resolves that. And I'll talk more about Mars in a moment. There's a Shakata yoga here that is formed when the moon is in house 6, 8, or 12 relative to Jupiter. So here the moon is 12th away from Jupiter. That's a Shakata yoga. Shakata, it has implications around, financial irregularities and ups and downs. But more broadly speaking, it can indicate a life that is, filled with, activity, ups and downs, and major changes in life. And certainly getting catapulted onto the world stage in this political role is huge undertaking. That's an understatement. So that's in place. Now, Neechabhanga. The Sun is debilitated. Mars is debilitated. Now, these are not in Kendras. They're not in Kendras from the Lagna, although they're both in Kendras from the Moon. So they're debilitated grahas in Kendras from Chandra Lagna. Now, Sun and Mars, what they have in common is that they're both Kshatriya grahas, which means they are associated with the command and control element of society, which are, in the old days would be the king, commanders-in-chief of military, etc. In modern times, it's presidents, prime ministers, CEOs, and still generals of armies and all the rest of that. Now, the fact that both of those are debilitated sort of casts some doubt on, what we would call leadership capacities and or organizational abilities, leadership strengths. So that, for the moment remains in doubt. But let's look and see whether Neechabhanga exists for either Sun and Mars. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole protocol because it's a bit detailed, and that will take too much time that I think is warranted. Take my word for it. When we go through the full protocol to analyze the Sun does achieve Neechabhanga. So it means that by virtue of the Sun's position and or assistance that it gets from Venus, Mars, and Saturn, which are all planets that have some affinity for the sign it occupies, the sign in which it would become exalted, they provide support such that the Sun achieves Neechabhanga liftoff. Then we ask ourselves, does the Sun participate in any Raja Yogas? No, it doesn't, because we've already determined there are no Raja Yogas, Dharma, Karma, Adhipati Yogas. None exist in this horoscope. So we're not going to be calling this Neechabhanga Raja Yoga. What about other yogas? Well, yes. Sun participates in a Budhaditya yoga with Mercury. Sun also participates in a Parivartana yoga with Venus. So the Sun participates in a couple of what we would call ordinary yogas. Therefore, we can say this is a Neechabhanga yoga that Sun has. So, what does Neechabhanga mean? It's basically a planet that is under some degree of duress, but is rehabilitated to some degree, that it recovers its abilities in part through the assistance of these other grahas. And its engagement in a yoga then can make it relatively strong. So far so good. The Sun recovers. What about Mars? Well, again, I'm not going to go through the protocol, but take my word for it. Mars fails to meet the grade. So Mars does not enjoy Neechabhanga status. It remains a debilitated planet. So think of it as a wounded limb, which is not restored by virtue of surgery or prosthetics or anything like that. It remains a kind of an Achilles heel. Therefore, this Mars in the second house will be a little bit of a sore spot. And, Mars in the second, can reflect upon speech. People say that she's not the greatest orator. And I think with Mars in the second house, there can be, a tendency to speak too bluntly sometimes. I mean, politicians are known for their, political speak and dodging questions and all the rest of that. Maybe she doesn't dodge them as well as she ought to. Or, there's some element of misspeaking that could, come back to haunt her. Be that as it may, there are other sufficient strengths. And even this debilitated Mars, its issue is resolved in some part by virtue of the Parivartana that it enjoys with the moon, which in your mind's eye, you can sort of toggle them back and forth and see them occupy, their own signs in mutual reception or sign exchange. Okay, so we'll park that for the moment and come back to other things. Now, the most complicated and perhaps substantive yoga in her horoscope is a Viparita yoga. Now, many people are relatively familiar with Viparita and its sort of basic rule of formation, which is actually found in only 3% of horoscopes. And here the rule goes. If a trick lord, Trikashtanas houses 6, 8, and 12. If the lord of a Trikashtana goes to another Trikashtana not its own, and there enjoys some measure of strength, and that could be exaltation, retrogression, full moon in the case of the moon, and even Swan nakshatra. Those are all judged to be elements of strength that will fulfill the protocol. So, trick lord must go to another Trikashtana, not its own, and there enjoy some strength. That's the second condition. Well, two conditions actually. Goes to another Trikashtana, not its own. There enjoys some strength. That's second condition. Third condition, does not suffer any collateral damage by virtue of any contact, by association or aspect from any other graha that is not a trick lord. Now, in this case, Mars, 6th lord, goes to the 2nd, 8th lord, Saturn, goes to the 9th, 12th lord, Venus, goes to the 3rd. None of those qualify because they don't even go to another Trikashtana. So that version, the single graha version of Viparita, with which most people are familiar, does not exist in Kamala's chart. However, there is another slightly more complicated and actually more common, this other Viparita yoga, which is formed courtesy of 2, sometimes 3 trick lords, is actually found in 10% of all horoscopes, so it's quite a bit more common. Here's how it is formed. If 2 trick lords should combine together, that's by association or by mutual aspect, in any house whatsoever, and one or the other enjoys some measure of strength to power up the yoga, and neither of them suffers any contact from any other graha that is not a trick lord. If all of those 3 conditions are fulfilled, you could have one of these multiple graha viparitas, just as powerful as the simple version I discussed earlier. So let's have a look at this. Kamala's sixth lord Mars is in the second house. Now, it doesn't make any association nor mutual aspect with any other graha. Okay, so that's dead in the water. Let's go to the eighth lord. Eighth lord is Saturn. Saturn is in the ninth house, and it enjoys a mutual aspect with Venus. And check it out. Ooh, Venus is lord of the 12th. Okay, so that means Saturn, lord of the 8th, is in full mutual aspect with Venus, lord of the 12th. That fulfills that first condition, that two trick lords are in Sambandha. Now, the second criterion is that one or the other must enjoy some measure of strength. Well, Saturn has it in spades. It is Swarashi and it's retrograde, so that's a double strength Saturn. Even Venus is strong. Venus is in a Venus nakshatra, so it's Swa nakshatra. They're both strong. This makes this particular union very powerful. What's the last criterion? That neither of them be touched by virtue of association or aspect, from any other non-trick graha. Okay, have a look. Venus is aspected only by Saturn and no other. Saturn is aspected by Venus and by Mars. Is Mars a spoiler in this case? No, because Mars itself is a trick lord, lord of the sixth. So Mars is kind of an aside in this. It sort of tries to shoehorn its way in, but it does not create the yoga, neither does it negate the yoga. The yoga is created by Venus and Saturn, the two trick lords that are in Sambandha and enjoy strength and are not suffering any kind of interference from a non-trick graha. Mars only aspects Saturn, but because it is a trick lord itself, it does not interfere with the yoga. So, to recap, Venus and Saturn form the Viparita yoga. Mars, does not negate it. So this Venus-Saturn Sambandha creates Viparita Raja Yoga. And this is a very powerful one because both planets are strong. Now, let's move on. Well, one other thing I should note now, this, aside from forming yogas, Venus and Saturn are also significant in her chart because they both rule houses that are important for people in political life and governmental activities. Here's why. All right, first, the three houses that we're interested in. The fifth house is the house of, let's call it subject matter expertise, portfolio management, or ministerial kind of role. It means knowledge-based capacity to, manage a portfolio, in government. The ninth house is the judiciary, but it's also the legislative aspect of government. So think parliament, think Congress. Finally, the 10th house is significant as well because it involves administration, command and control. Now, in this case, Jupiter is out of play. It's not involved here, but Venus and Saturn as Lord of 5 and 9 are intimately entwined in Sambandha, and therefore, this is one of the critical factors in judging anyone's capacity for high governmental office. So this Neechabhanga Raja Yoga does double service for her in a way. It allows access to government, and she's had a lifetime of public service, with escalating roles of responsibility. But the Neechabhanga Raja Yoga, what does that mean? It implies the ability to succeed against significant odds, to come from behind in a race, to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. In other words, to come from behind a difficult situation and overcome obstacles and achieve something against the odds. Sometimes there's a fair degree of suffering in getting there, but it shows the capacity for that to succeed. So this Venus-Saturn Sambandha is very powerful in creating Viparita Raja Yoga and also fulfilling some requirements for government service. Okay, so what else is notable about this horoscope? Take a look at this Rahu. Well, first in the Kendras, we see no visible graha. Now, some people say that the total absence of grahas in the Kendras implies, a person who cannot get their hands on the wheel of life. And therefore, they're best sequestered in an ashram or something like that. Let's not take that literally. In this case, Rahu and Ketu do occupy the Kendras, and they can be surrogates or proxies for other planets that do have power. In the case of Rahu, it's a surrogate for Mercury, which, forms Budhaditya Yoga, and that's one of the, significant assets that Kamala brings forth. Now, but back to this Rahu. Take a look at Rahu's very, very close proximity to the ascendant. The ascendant is at 1 degree, 3 minutes of Gemini. Rahu is at, and for the record, I'm using mean note. Rahu is at 2 degrees, 25 minutes Gemini. This is very close. There's only 1 degree and 22 minutes off. What does this imply? As we move on to look at various amshas, as the need dictates, we will discover that because of the very close proximity between ascendant and Rahu, Rahu will appear in the ascendant of many, many amshas. Now, that's a positive placement for Rahu, and she happens to be running Rahu Dasha. That will become more significant when I look at one of the key amshas. So that's a salient factor. This Rahu is exactly smack upon her ascendant. What does that mean? I mean, Rahu in the first can be, very strong ambitions, charisma, drive, some capacity for, novelty, inventiveness, out of the box thinking, and all the rest of that. Okay, the other notable feature of her horoscope is the moon. It's just off the edge of the horoscope here in this display, but the moon is at 419, I'm sorry, I believe it's 406, 417 of Aries. And here's the sun at 426 Libra. Oh, yeah, we can see it over here, 417. So this is an exact full moon. It's as full can be. It's waxing. It's only 9 minutes of arc away from perfection. That is only 15 minutes on the clock after birth before that becomes a perfectly full moon. So it's a full moon. It's moving a bit faster than normal. So this is incredibly dynamic. This moon's placement in the 11th house of, social dreams, aspirations, and political activity becomes very important, especially with respect to public engagement. And again, because the sun-moon aspect is so tight, this too will be perpetuated throughout most of the amshas. All right, so then we need to move on and consider Dasha Bhukti. So currently, Kamala is in Rahu Dasha Venus Bhukti. The Venus Bhukti started in February of 2024. It's a 3-year Bhukti, and it will run until February of 2027. Now, Rahu, as I noted, is going to invoke the power of Mercury, its dispositor, and that Mercury is well placed in the 5th house, creating a Budhaditya Yoga. And also, Mercury also participates in a Dhana Yoga. And we've just seen in the last week the incredible fundraising power of this new phase, the Democratic presidential race, is huge. So Mercury is a force to be reckoned with. And Rahu has, brought forward this Mercury power. Meanwhile, Rahu in the 1st house, provides a certain oomph and charisma, even to get into the running for this sort of thing. Let's move on and consider more the Venus Bhukti. So, the thesis is that during the running of any dasha or bhukti, The period lord will bring forth the prospects which are suggested by the period lord's participation in yogas in the horoscope. To say that a different way, if a period lord participates in certain yogas in the horoscope during its period, whether that be dasha or bhukti, it will bring forth and seek to manifest the promise of those yogas. Okay, back to Venus. What does Venus participate in? Well, as we saw, Venus and the Sun are in a Parivartana, lords of third and fifth. And as I said earlier, that's good for adventure, willpower, courage, daring, and analytic thinking, and all the rest of that. All good. Venus, critically creates this Viparita Raj Yoga with Saturn as well too, which is arguably the potential to overcome significant odds and come from behind, as it were, to win a victory. Okay, and additionally, I noted that Venus and Saturn also have ownership of houses 5 and 9, which are contributory to activity in government. All good, all to be brought forward in the Venus Bhukti. So would you say that this is a good Dasha Bhukti sequence? I would say so, yes. Rahu Dasha is going to activate, the self, the identity. It's the first house is, indicative of name and fame. Rahu is smack on that ascendant. It invokes Mercury, which is involved in, a Budhaditya and a Dhana yoga. And then the Venus Bhukti is also involved in 2 significant yogas as well too. So it's a good period. Now, at this juncture, I'm going to just take a pause, and we're going to take a look at the activation of a key amsha during this period. Okay, so we're back here. I've left the left-hand chart as before in the South Indian format. But here now on the right, I'm using the Ekadashamsha, courtesy, of the development of Sheshadri Iyer, who is a, mathematically inclined astrologer of yesteryear, who did major research on, the divisional charts, the so-called harmonic charts, the amshas, vargas of Vedic astrology. He advocates that for significant achievements in the world, whether they be financial or whether they be, social distinctions of some sort, things that are not entirely, under your control. So, in the financial arena, let's say, very, huge insurance payouts, or lottery winnings, or inheritances, or huge, stock market returns, or something like that. Big money kind of assessments. The D11 is used for that. Now, it's got a peculiar label on it, Cure. Let's ignore that and just think of, significant achievements. Monetary matters aside, it also reflects, social distinctions. Things like for which, votes are cast and your fate is in the wind. So things like Academy Awards, things like winning a Nobel Prize, things like winning a national election. These are reflected in the D11. So it's why I use this. This is the lead was provided by Sheshadri Iyer. This was taught to me by Hart Defoe, who in his, laboratory of thousands of clients over the years has, verified that this is a technique to be used. And as a consequence, we favor the D11 over the D10. Ekadashamsha, superior to Dashamsha when it comes to assessing major successes in life that are not entirely under our control. in the way that, excellence at work is, more under our control and could be reflected in the D10. The D11 is used for these kind of circumstances. So the context is, can't you win an election under this period? So let's be reminded that she's running Rahu Venus. So in Ayer's protocol of analysis, there's like 40 different rules, but let's keep it simple. Basically, period lords should be in positive houses. What are the positive houses? Well, it's easier to say which are the negative houses. Negative houses are the Dishtanas, 3, 6, 8, and 12. Kendras and trines are positive. 2nd and 11 are neutral. So in this case, let's have a look. Rahu occupies the first house. Remember how I said earlier, because Rahu was so close to the ascendant in the natal horoscope, it was going to follow the ascendant throughout the amshas, or most of the amshas. And I've stripped out the degrees because we do not use degrees in amshas or Varga charts. But here is Rahu in the ascendant. So Rahu is in the first house. That's a positive house. This is a great place to be with respect to political ambitions when you're running a Rahu period. Okay. The other, assessments are, is the planet strong by virtue of sign? Well, if Rahu is ordinary in Aries. Is it stabilized or destabilized by benefics versus malefics? Well, we can discount Ketu because Rahu, Ketu, it's a dyad. They're polar pair, and they're always together, either opposite or together in these amshas. But what's the addition here? Jupiter is the only other planet involved with Rahu. Jupiter enjoys strength from the natal horoscope because it's retrograde, therefore bright. Additionally, in the amshas, it picks up brownie points for being in the first house. That's a Digbala position. So this is a double strength Jupiter, the prime benefic, which is now stabilizing and promoting and reinforcing the power of Rahu Dasha in the context of D11 activities, which is, big wins in financial or political, contests. All good so far. What about Venus? Well, Venus is in a trine, so that checks one box. That's a positive position. What else? It's ordinary by sign in Leo. Okay, no brownie points there. What about influences upon it? Any benefic versus malefic influence? Well, as it turns out, that Jupiter aspects Venus, and so too does Mercury. So Venus is aspected by two benefics, one of which is very strong. So this Venus is well placed in the 5th house, and it is aspected, that is stabilized by two benefics. That's excellent. So the Rahu Dasha is good, and the Venus Bhukti is good. And again, I'll repeat, Venus Bhukti runs from February 2024 until February 2027. We're only in the first third of that. So far, so good. Okay, so this is great, and I don't need to look at any other amshas to assess her political status. This is fine as is. Let me stop that and move on to one final thing. Okay, and now we're simply back to the natal chart, and I'm not going to put up the planets because I don't want to crowd the scene with too much detail. But following on the theory of Sheshadri Iyer, he says that as far as transits go, a graha's passage through a nakshatra will activate the meanings and associations of that nakshatra lord in the horoscope under study. So basically, and he can, keep it pretty simple and say, looking ahead with respect to transits, you can simply focus on Jupiter, the Sun, and the Moon. Jupiter will basically allow you to forecast ahead 1 year. The Sun will allow you to forecast for a month. and the moon will give you a horizon of a couple of days. So basically, I simply looked at election day 2024, which is November 5th, and you can follow up on this on your own if you like, but take my word for it. Here's where things are. Jupiter will be at, and I'll just point to, where its relative position would be. Jupiter will be at 26 degrees Taurus on election day. Now, that's in the nakshatra of Mrigashira, which does activate Mars, which, as I said, it's got some mixed reviews because it is debilitated and it does not enjoy Neechabhanga. It remains a debilitated planet, but it does enjoy this Parivartana circumstance with the moon, which rescues it to a fair degree. And it is, as I also noted earlier, one of the Kshatriya grahas that, sort of connotes leadership, command, and control. But the salient thing really is that Jupiter, once it's into, even though it's still in Taurus, late Taurus, it is in the nakshatra of Mrigashira, which straddles two signs. Mrigashira runs from 2320 of Taurus up to 640 of Gemini. So Jupiter will be still in the Taurus portion of that, but basically it will be in the same nakshatra that is rising for in Kamala's chart. She has 1 degree rising in Gemini. That is Mrigashira nakshatra. So Jupiter, even though it's still in Taurus on election day, it has entered her rising nakshatra. Jupiter in the rising nakshatra is going to bring credit and honor to her because of that. What about the sun? The sun on that day, as it always is, the sun is always at 18, 19, or 20 degrees Libra on election day because it's always right around the same date. So as it turns out this year, the sun will be in 19 degrees Libra on election day. Now that's in Swati, which is a Rahu nakshatra. Therefore, the transiting sun will give the results of Rahu in Kamala's chart. And as we saw earlier, Rahu is eminently placed smack on the Lagna in her horoscope and invokes, this substantial Mercury, Budhaditya, Dhana yoga. And significantly too, I believe, contact with the public, Mercury and Moon, this mutual aspect. Last but not least, where is the moon on that day? The moon is over here in Sagittarius, and it's going to, run a range from opening of polls at, 6 or 7 a.m. in some locations, up until, 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night on election day. It'll run a span of between 4 degrees and 10 degrees of Sagittarius. But that means it remains throughout in Mula nakshatra, which is ruled by Jupiter. Now, Jupiter in her horoscope is not eminently placed because it's in the 12th house, but it is strong, and it is the lord of her 10th house. Now, that is not the best kind of setup for crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. Be that as it may, the sum total of it all, I believe, is a pretty good outlook for Kamala in the run-up over these next, 3 months and a bit. Here we are in July, August, September, October, 3.5 months to election day. In the run-up to that and including election day, I think this all looks very good for her. So we may be witnessing history in the making.